I was waiting for that. Good. Okay. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to Highwire Press's Best Practice webinar series. Today's webinar is about complying with funder and government mandates. My name is Tony Alves. I'm Senior Vice President of Product Management here at Highwire. I'll be introducing today's topic and our presenters, as well as moderating questions and discussions. So first, some housekeeping. The webinar is being recorded, as you heard, and that recording will be shared after the meeting. Please put your questions in the question box, and we'll answer those questions at the end of the webinar. And finally, Highwire will be exhibiting at this year's SSP meeting in Chicago. If you're going to be there, please visit our exhibit booth and say hi to me and my colleagues Eric Hall, Meg Waits, and Bob Donegan. We are at booth 518. So on to complying with mandates. Although a vast amount of research funding comes from industry, a large amount of funding, especially for basic science, for public health, for social science, it comes from governments and from public and private foundations, including university endowments. There are generally strings attached to receiving research funding, and often those strings are attached to the final output of the research, such as journal articles, books, and conference proceedings. Funding mandates can take various forms, including data deposit requirements, open access requirements, accessibility mandates, and other policies that ensure some level of transparency and access. For example, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation requires the archiving of data of research that they fund for the purpose of secondary research in the field of social science. The U.S. National Science Foundation has very stringent accessibility rules for any publication related to NSF funding opportunities. And U.S. Federal funding agencies have been directed to adopt persistent identifiers in order to reduce administrative burden and increase transparency. In this best practice webinar, speakers from Orchid, JISC, and Springer Publishing will discuss various aspects of funder mandates and compliance with those mandates. Shauna Sadler is engagement manager at Orchid, where she heads up outreach and partnerships, building strategic relationships worldwide and exploring new opportunities for adoption and growth. As I mentioned, U.S. federal research funding agencies have been directed to adopt digital persistent identifiers in order to reduce administrative burden in the research ecosystem. As Orchid is the only provider of these persistent identifier services, to meet the criteria, Shauna will explain how organizations and researchers can adopt Orchid to best meet the new requirements. She'll also discuss a recent announcement of a collaboration between Orchid and the OA Switchboard to increase accuracy in affiliation matching. Following Shauna, Sharon Jackson is product manager at JISC. Karen works with Open Research Services team at JISC and has worked across several areas in open research, in the open research portfolio. She now manages Sherpa Services, leading the development and evolution of these products. A qualified library professional, she has background in HE libraries, repository management, open access advocacy, and service management. John McCrow is licensing manager at JISC. As part of the licensing team at JISC, John focuses mainly on the UKRI open access policy, assisting publishers to arrange compliance with the policy that came into effect April of 2020, this year. John has a background that covers academic libraries, open access, and publishing. And during their presentation, they'll cover the recent introduction of the new UKRI open access mandates in the UK, providing context for this within the current UK open access landscape. They'll explain how publishers and authors comply with this policy and how JISC supports the policy implementation. They'll also look at some of the services they provide to assist users with complying with funder policies, such as JISC's Sherpa and Monitor services. And Matt Zimmerman will wrap us up in the, he is the online platform director at Springer Publishing Company, where he manages the Springer Connect platform. He also managed digital platforms at John Wiley & Son, IEEE, and UT Southwestern Medical Center Library. Matt will discuss making digital textbooks accessible as many people as possible, and why it's important, what to consider, and how to begin implementing an accessibility strategy. So, well, not that yet, but I am now going to turn it over to Shauna, and I will stop my sharing. And Shauna.
Thanks, Tony. I appreciate it. Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me here today. Just as I load my screen here. So as Tony mentioned, my name is Shauna Sadler. I'm the engagement manager for outreach and partnerships here at Orchid. So the agenda today for my slides, I'm going to do a quick introduction to Orchid for those who might not be completely aware of what we do and the services that we provide. Second, as Tony mentioned, I'm going to speak about research security and Orchid in the context of the international community and in the United States. And then last, I'll have a few slides on OA Switchboard and Orchid's new collaboration. So a few facts about Orchid. Orchid is a global research infrastructure organization registered in the United States. We launched our registry in 2012 and happily reached our goal of financial break-even just 7 years later in 2019. And we're now 100% sustained by fees from our member organizations. And some of you are here today, and we thank you for your continued support. So we're a community built and governed by a board of directors that represent our membership with wide stakeholder representation. So Orchid is supported by 37 dedicated staff located in 14 countries across 5 continents. So Orchid stands for Open Researcher and Contributor Identifier. We provide 3 main services. First is the Orchid ID, or just the Orchid. People seem to use them interchangeably. Regardless, it's the free, unique, persistent 16-digit identifier that researchers own and control forever, that distinguishes and disambiguates them from every other researcher throughout their careers. Second, we provide a record, otherwise known as a digital CV or profile, to capture the researcher's research-related information. Third, we want the data to be used as much as possible in order to reduce the administrative burden on researchers. They don't have to rekey their data into various forms. We provide APIs so thousands of systems can transfer the data between an Orchid CV and the internal systems of research organizations like yours. So here's an example from our fictional researcher, Sofia Maria Hernandez Garcia. So please imagine Sofia is a researcher submitting a manuscript to one of your titles. Sofia went to our website, orchid.org, and spent about 1 minute registering for her Orchid ID, which you see at the top of the screen. It's the URL ending in 2427. So under Sophia's unique ID, you can see her digital CV, which over time she has added data about herself, or organizations and systems that Sophia trusts write data to her record automatically, which is what Orchid likes to see. It's much easier for researchers if the data flows into their records rather than having to add it manually themselves. So examples of data are employment, education, funding, and of course their research outputs. So why would a researcher want to do this? The original problem Orchid set out to solve was to enable researchers to distinguish themselves from other researchers who might have the same or similar name. Researchers also like to collect all of their contributions to research over time that may have used various versions of their name. So both problems are significant issues for researchers. Many people have the same or similar name, and there's a lot of inconsistency in the publication of name formats. So over the past 10 years, we've come to realize that Orchid offers these 6 key benefits listed here on the right. We've heard from researchers that ORCID IDs allow them to have name flexibility, and they appreciate that they control the data and the visibility of their data in their ORCID CVs. And the ORCID ID and CV stays with them wherever they go throughout the course of their careers. So just so you have a sense of ORCID uptake around the world, over the past 10 years, we've issued an ORCID ID to researchers in nearly every country in the world, with the exception of these 3 small islands in orange, and we're hoping to connect with researchers there soon. Approximately 1 million IDs have been issued to researchers in the US. Second is Brazil, followed by China, Great Britain, India, Spain, and Germany. So when you receive a manuscript from someone in any of these countries that I just listed, there's a good chance they'll have an ORCID ID, and you can use that ID to populate their data into your systems. So we've highlighted a few of the significant systems that ORCID has integrated with, systems that drive the research ecosystem. You can see some of the universities and publishers that have been writing to ORCID profiles listed here. On the right is a new and interesting development. It's funding agencies and research facilities are increasingly adopting ORCID to not only track which researchers receive grants and award time, but they are also tracking the publications that resulted in the funded works by adopting other persistent identifiers for publications and grant IDs as well. So the reporting and impact assessment within the research ecosystem is improving. So that's my overview of ORCID. And if anybody has any questions about ORCID, I'm happy to take them, and then I'll share my email address at the end, and please feel free to reach out to me as well. Okay, so within my role, I've been asked to keep an eye on the topic of research security and ORCID's role within this new topic. So if this is a new topic to you, please don't worry. It's been an issue within closed circles for quite a while now, and we're just recently coming into general awareness now. The problem that's been identified is that a small number of foreign governments have been found interfering with research and exploiting researchers. So the US and other G7 countries are wanting to protect both their national interests and their researchers from such activities. The G7 countries are clear that they want to maintain the current open environment for research, so to continue the collaborative and mutually beneficial discoveries that research provides. So one of the more famous examples is Professor Lieber of Harvard's chemistry department, who was arrested by the FBI for his relationship with the Chinese government, receiving financial support in exchange for exclusive access to research findings, not disclosing this relationship to the university or the funding agencies, which also supported his work, and then, of course, tax evasion. So over the past year or two, the G7 has formed a working group to focus on research security and integrity. They're working towards developing shared principles and best practices. A research security toolkit is under development with an expected release date of spring 22, so any day now. And they're working towards a funding model in order to help research organizations within the G7 to collectively meet these new expectations. So we've also heard that the Five Eyes Alliance are also coordinating on research security. So this group is comprised of Australia, Canada, New Zealand, the US, and the United Kingdom. So this group is working towards common policies and practices related to research security. Okay, so now I'm going to shift and speak specifically to the work that's being done in the US. There's been quite a lot of work that's happened in the US. And it seems to have culminated in the US National Security Presidential Memorandum, NSPM 33, which was published on January 14th of 2021. So you may notice the date of this memorandum is within the final hours of the Trump administration. And it's important to note that the Biden administration has endorsed NSPM 33. So this document was issued by the executive branch and is speaking to the US federal agencies that fund research, providing direction to the funding agencies that undue foreign influence must be taken seriously and significant changes are expected. So one of the expectations issued in the document is the adoption of digital persistent identifiers, otherwise known as DPIs, and funding agencies to develop a policy regarding DPIs. So in January of 2022, through the White House, the Joint Committee of Research Environment issued a follow-up guidance document to NSPM 33 to help provide more specific direction and clarity to the expectations. And I'll put a link to this document in the chat in a second. So in this document, there's a strong emphasis on reducing administrative burden to help balance the increased expectation of disclosure requirements. So adopting DPI services into the application and reporting workflow is expressed as an ideal way to help meet the expanded disclosure requirements, while also facilitating the reduction of administrative burden on researchers. So I'm just going to copy this link and put it in the chat for everybody. There we go. So this document, the guidance document, is the more useful document to refer to. The first document is interesting, but it's the second one that has more of the specific information. So within this NSPM 33 guidance document, the criteria for providing a DPI service is listed, and we're pleased to say, as Tony mentioned earlier, that it's only Orchid that meets the full list of criteria. So within this guidance document, when you open the document, if you can go to page 4, chart 2A is the key chart for this particular conversation. So you'll find in this chart, there's 3 sections that specifically list which content is required for researchers to provide within specific forms. So the 3 sections are personal information, research funding information, and project information. So for the context of this presentation, you'll notice that there is not a requirement for a complete list of publications and peer reviews, but in the spirit of disclosure, it would really help researchers if publishers would write the final citation to their Orchid record, and ideally the peer review contributions as well. So this is a really complicated issue, and a multi-pronged approach is expected. The final expectations to meet disclosure requirements have not been finalized yet, or maybe they have, just hasn't been shared yet. It's hard to say. But at this point, we know the US is asking research funding agencies to make their expectations of disclosure more clear and to harmonize the policies and practices across the agencies as much as possible. So at this point, the NIH and NSF have said that they're adding Orchid functionality to their BioSketch and current and pending or other support forms. And so here's a quote from the updated NSF Policies and Procedures Guide. You can see in this quote that they encourage the adoption and use of Orchid ID to reduce administrative burden, and we're looking forward to the policies of other federal funding agencies as well. So at Orchid, we've tried to create this graphic to visualize data flowing through the entire research ecosystem. So we have the researcher with their Orchid ID at the center of it all. Her publisher is on top in purple, her home universities to the right in red, and her research funder are below in gold. So it is ideal if publishers can write the publication citation and peer review recognition to the researcher's Orchid record. That way, when the researcher applies for funding, they share their Orchid ID with the funder, and the citation your publishing organization wrote to their record. This is then pre-populated into the funder's application or reporting form, which is helping to reduce the administrative burden on researchers. It also ensures the correct data about the publication is shared with funders, and they can find and verify the publication. So to quickly reiterate, it's ideal for publishers to write to the activities in the author's Orchid record, write the final citation to the Orchid record, and secondly, write to the peer review recognition to the Orchid record as well. And I should add that we're asking universities to write to the employment field so publishers and funders can easily see the researcher's current employer, and your systems can pull this data to reduce the administrative burden and increase the quality of data in your workflows as well. So I'm going to stop speaking about research security and of course open for questions, but I'm going to change gears and talk about the OA Switchboard, which is a new initiative. So we are excited to announce there's a new collaboration, the OA Switchboard and Orchid, to enable smart matching in OA Switchboard. So in the April 22 release, OA Switchboard users will be able to leverage authoritative employment data from authors' Orchid profiles to corroborate affiliations or organizational identifiers such as ROR Ringolds, to ensure more accurate routing of the messages that are being shared between participants throughout the open access research cycle and publication journey. So if your organization is currently or planning to use OA Switchboard, please encourage your authors to get and use their Orchid ID. It will help to streamline work for everyone in the OA workflow. So specifically, this is an example pulled from my Orchid record. The OA switchboard will look for the employment field in the author's current employer. And within the data, there are the current employer organization has a unique identifier. So in this example, it's the ROR, the ROR, and that's the unique identifier there ending in X39. So this will help you route your message to the current employer to coordinate OA policies and fees. Okay, so that's the end of my presentation there, Tony. I'll cede my time to my colleagues or yourself.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Shauna. And please go ahead and put any questions in the Q&A. And if you have a problem with the Q&A, go ahead and put them in the chat and we'll collect them there. But if you have questions for Shauna, we'll take those at the end. And Karen and John, you're up next.
Okay. Hello. Yes, so I'll share my screen with the slides on. And begin. So hopefully you can all see my slides in front of you.
Not yet.
No? Share screen, second screen.
Yeah.
Now?
Yeah. Yep. There we go.
Yeah. Okay, great. Excellent. Okay. So thank you, Tony and the team at Highway for having us. I'm John McCrow, the licensing manager here at JISC. And in this presentation today, I'm going to outline the crux of the UKRI. This is the UK Research and Innovation Funder in the UK, their new open access policy. I'll be talking through the routes that publishers have taken to offer open access publishing to UK institutions and researchers. And although our vantage point here is mainly pertaining to the new UKRI policy, I'm hoping that this is equally useful to all publishers, not just those that publish UKRI funded research. Okay, so a little bit about us. I represent the JISC licensing team here in the UK, and we negotiate and license content and software that directly supports education and research ambitions of UK higher education and further education institutions. We're one of the largest library consortia in the world, and we manage around 300 renewals a year. And when it comes to open access renewals and negotiations, in the year 2021, we managed to save the sector £8 million. We do definitely cover a lot of bases, and one of the bases that we cover is this new UKRI open access policy. It's not easy to explain, but I'm going to do my best to do it as succinctly as possible. So under this new UKRI open access policy, all peer-reviewed research and review articles need to be published open access as of April this year. And that's when funded through the UKRI or any of their councils. And there are two routes to do this. You can either go route one, which is fairly straightforward, and that's to have the final version of record made open access. And that's to be published open access immediately without embargo and under a CC BY license. Then we have a second option, route two. And here an author is permitted to self-archive their work, either the accepted manuscripts or the version of record, and that's to be self-archived in an institutional or subject-based repository. But again, as mentioned, it has to be immediate without embargo and with a CC BY license. Now, this policy from UKRI mirrors policies from other major funders in the UK. We consider this a period of transition. So UKRI have offered open access block grants that are available until the end of the year 2024. And this is to be a period of transition. So it's temporary yet rapid to move things over. here's a broader programme of the work that we've been doing to support the UKRI policy. We've been working for several years negotiating OA agreements with publishers of all sizes, and this is really just an extension of that work. We're rapidly scaling up the amount of agreements that we do, and it fundamentally needs to be that we are offering frictionless routes to open access for UKRI funded researchers. We're also working hard to provide tools for authors and research organisations so that they can navigate their way through all of this. It also then allows us to have automated reporting and improved workflows. So I think we'll touch on that a little more in the second half of this presentation. Our discussions with publishers really are we're aiming to open up publishing opportunities for authors based anywhere, whatever their funding situation and wherever they choose to publish. So we're trying to be broad with this. All of our efforts are reported back to the funder, UKRI. Funds are limited, so we need to make sure we're having a return that's of the best value for public money, and also doing our best to make sure that this doesn't result in a burden administratively to institutions. And we do definitely have to work with all stakeholders within this. UKRI is the funder, publishers, researchers that publish, and their institutions as well. So what impact has this had so far? Reinforced support for open access has meant that this has ramped up quite significantly. And I've got a pointer here for this. As of last week, this is data from ESAC, the Transformative Agreement Registry. If we take transformative agreements here in the UK through JISC and fully open access journals, we can get to 77% of UK research being open access. And our main focus at the moment is to address journals and publishing portfolios within this section here, hybrid closed. In a lot of cases, publishers will be compliant with the policy, but it's to ascertain where they're at and to offer them consultative support to get through it further. But anecdotally, looking at this a couple of months ago, we were in 60s, and now things have moved quite significantly. So the aim is to get as close to 100% as we can. Earlier, I mentioned route 1 of compliance or route 2 of compliance. And in forthcoming slides, I'll try and explain these further. There really are a myriad of different variations. These are kind of broad categories to that. And we found that publishers often don't go with one route. They can go with multiple routes to compliance with this. And I'll cover read and publish shortly, subscribe to open, the green route, route 2. Fully gold is quite self-explanatory. And then we do also have one that straddles the two, JISC approved transformative journal status. And this can be attained by either being a Coalition S transformative journal and having a read and publish agreement through JISC, or the other option, a Coalition S transformative journal and the green OA route over here. So, and that's as tight as I can get this slide. There's a lot of information, and I think it will benefit to see it visually. So route 1, the most popular transformative agreement model is definitely read and publish, wherein this converts subscription payments into funds for OA publishing. Institutions will pay an agreed amount with a publisher and then split it up into two different components, read and publish. In exchange, authors can publish their articles open access without paying any additional APCs. And then on top of that, institutions and their readers can gain read access to the journals. And this is quite important. If an institution here in the UK is signed up to UKRI funding and all the necessary boxes are ticked, then they can claim back some of the publishing charges via their open access block grant. Here in the UK, with JISC, it's an opt-in, so members agree to opt in and out of agreements. Most transitional agreements have literally been frictionless with open access. It gets published immediately. to a publisher's portfolio of journals. It guarantees compliance and offers a seamless experience for authors. And then on a positive note for publishers, it often increases participation in these agreements and upgrades as well if they were to take full collections of content. But I need to mention here that this isn't really suitable for publishers that don't have the ability to implement OA workflows and reporting. But it is a great way of meeting compliance with the policy. And then if I move on to route 2, this was the green open access route. With this model, a publisher permits compliant green open access as an integral part of their offering to institutions as an added benefit. This is not exclusive. It can be used in conjunction with APC-based models. Although APC-based models, if the hybrid journal is not included in a transformative agreement or considered a JISC-approved transformative journal, then it would not be covered by UKRI block grant. We have found that publishers often worry that this will lead to cancellations of subscriptions, but to be honest, with experiences so far, that doesn't seem to be the case. And with many institutions who have their own checklists when it comes to renewal season, this is the definitive part of that they have an inclusion for green open access compliance. So it's a very positive point to have. I have to mention now green open access by exception, and you may think that this is a repeat of what I've already said. This is ever so slight tweak to that, in that with this one, this is in a situation when publishers are not able to offer products through JISC, but they do still wish to be compliant. So we work consultatively with the publisher to help them do that. It's often used on its own as base compliance for this policy, but also as a backstop for transitional agreements, read and publish agreements to guarantee compliance. Fundamentally, it's all about green lights that UK funded authors know that the publisher is compliant and therefore they can submit their journals submit their articles to those journals. Although this is not managed through JISC, these are still ways that we can help consultatively to help publishers meet compliance with the policy and to help them disseminate communications to that effect. Other exciting routes, so there's like the routes of subscribe to open, where they convert paywalled journals to open access with subscription revenues from previous years. So libraries will pledge to this, and then within that year, if the pledges are met, then the content will be published open access. This is a great example of a model that also benefits from the green open access backstop, which is something that we mandate here at JISC. It works best when there's a great subscriber base already, of stable subscriptions, and annual reviews have done this very well for some years now, offering discounts along the way, but it's worked. I've got a couple of others to plug. There's other community-based models that are compliant with the policy. The Open Library of Humanities is a collection of journals funded through a consortium of libraries in partnership. And then announced earlier this year, we have this Diamond Open Access Community Framework. This is managed through JISC. This too is funded by pledges. There's a call for pledges annually and commitments run for 3 years. And this is very new. We had a member day about it just yesterday. And I'll share these slides around so that you can access the links for more information. Our approach really has been to continue and to include as many small publishers as we can, and prioritizing them over the past couple of years. Well, definitely over the past 12 months. We do this work through a lot of data divination, looking at all publisher data of published articles, subscription data, and to try to then ascertain the best fit model for that publisher to be compliant with the policy. We understand that the portfolio of publishing at each publisher is completely different. So we're always happy to consult and then hopefully find the best pathway. that it needs to meet the needs of the publisher sustainably and also be compliant with the policy. So just as I close this up, I'm going to quickly plug some work by some consultants, Information Power, just over here. They created a toolkit for fostering open access agreements. It does a great job of enabling participation across the board of all sizes of publishers. And if you get a chance, please give it some time and have a read. I think now I'll hand over to my colleague, Karen Jackson, who will go over the tools on offer from JISC.
Thank you very much, John. Can I share my camera as well? I can, fantastic. Okay, hi everyone. So I'm Karen. I am, as Tony mentioned, I am one of the product managers at JISC. I'm in a different team from John, so I'm based in the Open Research Services team, and our responsibility is providing products and services to support our users in and our members in managing and navigating open access and open research, sharing and publishing, really. I particularly work with the Sherpa Services, and we focus around policy and compliance within open research. So I'm just going to run through 4 or 5 slides now, just to give you an overview of a couple of our products, which particularly support the funder mandates. So fantastic, thank you, John. So first off, Sherpa Services. You may be familiar with Sherpa. We've got users all around the globe. We've got 3 main elements to the Sherpa Services. They're known as Sherpa Romeo, Sherpa Juliet, and Sherpa Fact. Sherpa Romeo has actually been around for 20 years this year. I haven't been working on it all that time. And Romeo's remit is collating and summarizing journal and publisher open access policies. So we take sometimes really quite complex policies around what publishers will allow their authors to do with their work, how they share it, in what locations, in what licenses they can apply, all of that sort of information. And we summarize it and present it to our members and users in a straightforward and clear manner as much as we can. That it's become more tricky to do that over the years, to be honest. We used to have quite straightforward policies. We're now finding that there's lots of prerequisites and different aspects of the policies that apply sometimes to authors only if they're funded by a certain funder, for example. So the policies are becoming more complex, and we are finding that we're having to develop and adapt our services to meet those requirements. Sherpa Juliet is our data set of funder open access policies. So this is obviously a much smaller data set than Sherpa Romeo, and this details all of the requirements of the funders with relation specifically to open access in terms of what they require from their researchers and authors in terms of the outputs of the research that they fund. And then Sherpa Fact is essentially our compliance checker, compliance engine, and this takes data from the first 2 of our services and provides answers to users along the lines of, if I publish in this journal and I am funded by this funder, do those policies align? Do they comply with each other? And can I meet the requirements of my funding if I publish in this way? So it's really just trying to simplify and make clear the various policies and requirements that authors need to adhere to in order to publish open access. We also, just to mention actually before we leave this slide, a lot of our users do come to our Sherpa interface and interrogate these data sets using our search functionality on our interface, but we do also provide all of this data through an API, which is actually the way that the majority of our users and the people that we interact with actually access our data. So our Sherpa API has between 8 and 10 million hits per month. So it's very widely used all across the globe. Okay, if you could move on to the next slide, please, John, thank you. Obviously, with the new UKRI policy in particular, but just with more funder policies and mandates coming out in general, we are having to adapt to be able to take in different types of policy and things such as the transformative agreements, which John has already referred to. So we've started to develop tools, particularly around transformative agreements, also transitional journal lists as well, to help our users access that data. So for transformative agreements, for example, we've been doing work to analyze those agreements. They're in their sort of original state, they're complex, they're long agreements, long documents, which realistically a researcher or an author is most likely not going to sit and read through all of the detail. So we've been taking those documents, manually analyzing those, extracting the relevant policy information and converting it into data, which will be machine readable and we can share via our API, and then integrating that into our tools. At present, we've got a basic transitional agreement lookup tool, but we are intending, with some redevelopment work of our Sherpa services, to integrate this data directly into journal policy records. So you will view a journal policy and you will then be able to see in the same place, this journal is part of a transformative agreement with the publisher. If you are an author based at any particular university, then you will be able to make use of this because your university has signed up to this agreement. So we're working on creating tools along those lines to give that information to our users as well. If you could move on to the next slide. So this diagram just shows you where we're going really with upgrading our compliance checker to be able to include all of this information. So if I can just very briefly talk you through this, we've got a journal search would be carried out by our user. If they're looking at a fully open access or other type of journal other than hybrid, then it will go through a compliance check. We will check against the funder policy data, including the location that the journal policy allows. So can it be shared in an institutional repository? Can it be shared on the on the author's website? Could it be shared on any other website? All those different possibilities, the version of the output that can be shared, published version versus the accepted manuscript, what type of licenses have to be applied, who owns the copyright, any embargo periods that are relevant. Our compliance checker will check all of these things, identify in what way the author can meet the requirements of the funder policy by publishing in that journal, and present that as a result to users. And then very similarly, on the bottom level of that diagram, you've got the process for hybrid journals, which is much the same, except it also includes a check as to whether there is a transitional agreement in place, whether the university of the author has signed up to that transitional agreement, and whether the policy of the agreement matches the requirements of the funder and the journal. So I'm sure as you're gathering from this diagram, it is quite a complicated process, and we're not fully there yet. We have a compliance checker which does everything for the OA and other journals that's listed there. We can do that for hybrid journals, but we don't yet have full integration with the ability to check for transitional agreements. So those two last points that are just highlighted in orange there on the diagram are areas that we're still working on. So it's an ongoing process, and there's a lot to consider, but that's where we are with compliance tools just now. If you could go on to the next slide, please. This is the last bit for me just to roughly go through. So this is another tool that's currently in development within our team. It's called Monitor Open. We have a previous version that's just Monitor, which anyone may possibly be familiar with. And this is a tool which it's a product which helps our members to manage the open access publication process, publication lifecycle, and the monitoring and reporting that needs to be done, particularly in terms of reporting back to funders how the funding has been spent, how many articles have been published open access with that funding, you know, where the article processing charges have been paid, for example. So I won't go through all of this because I'm conscious that I'm probably going over our time, but it's essentially a publication database. We're pulling in data sources from various places, and we're providing interfaces and dashboards for different types of users. So for authors, institutional representatives, that's most likely to be the library staff or the research office staff, funder accounts, and also a JISC account for us to manage as well. With the funder accounts, we really hope will allow funders to get much more information about the way their funding is being used in terms of open access publishing and the compliance with their requirements, and cut down the bureaucracy for the library staff and the authors in terms of the reporting and preparation that they have to put into sending all of that information back to funders to comply with their policy. I will pick up as well, as obviously it's been referred to in the previous presentation too, that we're incorporating the OA Switchboard into Monitor Open. So in the first place, this will be incorporated to allow us to receive publication metadata from the OA Switchboard. In the second iteration, Monitor Open is not yet released, it's still in development. But in the second iteration, we're building in a messaging infrastructure to allow users to view and action correspondence in relation to the publication of their articles or outputs, all within one system. So again, hopefully we're really building on this idea of having one place where you can sort out everything to do with your open access publishing, and similarly with Sherpa, one place where you can find everything you need to know about the policy and compliance for your outputs. So that brings me to the end of everything I want to just highlight in terms of the tools that we're building at present. I will share in the chat in a moment, we've got a blog post that was released by our Director of Open Research Services recently, just around all of the support that we're putting in place to support the UKRI policy implementation. So I'll pop that in the chat if anyone's interested in reading a bit more. And yep, that's it from us. I think the next slide has just got our contact details on. But yep, thank you very much. That's it from me.
Thank you very much, Karen and John. So let's move on to Matt.
All right. Okay, so let's see. Oh, let me share my screen. And open up my slides. And I'll see if I can turn on
Should be able
video.
to.
Yeah. Oop. Got too many things open here. Okay. Let's see. Start video. All right. And you can see my slides.
Yes, can see your slides.
Great. Okay. My name is Matt Zimmerman. Before I start, I just want to, since I'm talking about accessibility, I'm hoping you can see that there are closed captions on the bottom of this. And that's actually a feature that's built into PowerPoint, Microsoft PowerPoint. If you haven't used it, you can activate closed captions. They don't get recorded. They just, as you're presenting, they're in the deck. But since this is being recorded, they'd be there for someone who goes back and watches. And also at the bottom, when you're preparing slides, there's something that says accessibility investigate, and it goes through your slides and picks out all the problems you have that cause accessibility problems. So I put this together very recently, and you can see I don't have alternative text for many things. I don't have slide titles. So these are all things that if you're going to share your slides with someone, you might want to fix a bunch of these. So I'll probably do that after this. And then if anyone needs accessible versions of this, I can send. But so a lot of software now is incorporating a lot more accessibility features. Okay, so a little bit about me. As Tony said, I'm the online platform director at Springer Publishing Company. I manage our ebook and journal platform called Connect. And before that, I worked at Wiley on the Wiley Online Library and at IEEE on the IEEE Explorer. A little bit about Springer, just so there's no confusion. A lot of you might know there are at least two Springers in the publishing world. We are the little Springer, as we call ourselves. The big Springer is Springer Nature. We're a different company. We're an independent publisher founded in 1950, based in New York City. We're very small. We have about 60 employees, and we publish primarily healthcare and behavioral sciences textbooks, professional books, and test prep. So our site is springerpub.com, and the big Springer is springer.com. There's at least one more Springer in publishing called Axel Springer. If you're in Germany, they publish Bild and a lot of other magazines. So yeah, there's a lot of Springers running around in the text and the publishing world. I'm not going to talk as much today about funding and government mandates because, as Tony said, we are primarily a textbook publisher. So we aren't getting funding. But a lot of the same accessibility guidelines apply. And we are a customer of Highwire. We're on their Scaleris platform, and we've been working with them on accessibility issues. So that's how I came to be here. I'm going to talk, I'm not an expert on accessibility in any way, but I'm pretty much coming as someone who was running a platform, didn't really know anything about accessibility, and had to learn along the way. And I just want to share some of those experiences with you. So simply, accessibility, it comes from the idea that people have equal access to information and knowledge, regardless of disability. Just like we support open access because we think people should have equal access to information, we also need to make sure that that equal access includes that it can reach as many people as possible, regardless of the disability. And we often just think of maybe vision impairment and hearing impairment, but there are a lot of disabilities that affect someone's ability to interact with text, whether it's dyslexia, epilepsy, mobility impairment can affect the way someone can use a device. So all of these things tend to be covered when you're talking about accessibility, not just vision impairment and hearing impairment. So now this might seem obvious why it's important, but as you said, the primary reason is that people are entitled to equal access. But also there's probably some technical reasons like funding requirements. For us, if we sell into any state universities in the United States, there's institutional requirements about accessibility. And for us, it also just makes good, I think I spelled business wrong, but it makes good business sense. I mean, we're a for-profit publisher. We want people to buy our books. So we want as many people to be able to read them. And I think the reason I bring this up is often with accessibility, we often think of it as a box we have to check off because of these institution requirements or funding requirements. And you can do that, but often it's not really often accessible when you do it that way, because you're sort of just doing the minimum requirements to meet these different funding requirements. So I want to talk more about things you can do to make it truly accessible. Now, there's different levels. It can be very expensive to address all the different ways to make books and journals accessible. So it really comes down to, like, so for instance, we publish a lot of nursing textbooks. There aren't a lot of people in the nursing field who are visually impaired. That doesn't mean there aren't, but so you have to sort of judge how much you want to invest in this. On the other hand, in the behavioral sciences, there are more people who might have different disabilities. And we also published 2 books about accessibility. So for those, we definitely have to make those accessible. And just some quick facts, since we're in the higher ed, but this is probably will apply across populations too. In the United States, about 20% of undergrad students have declared some disability, and they break down learning, ADHD, mobility, health, chronic, and psychiatric disability. So, a large amount of readers do need text to be accessible. And I want to talk about the 3 things. I think we often focus on platforms when we're a publisher. Is our platform accessible? But there are 3 things that go into making content accessible. 1 is the device that a reader is using. 2 is the platform that's delivering that content. And the 3rd is the content, which I believe we tend to do a pretty good job with device and platforms, but then we also have to make sure the content that we're putting into those platforms is accessible. And that's the part that takes more work and is more expensive. And I'm talking about this mainly as a publisher, but I hope this will help also people, people who are librarians, and then also people who are authors and researchers who are preparing content. So devices, it used to be you needed a lot of specialized software to make text accessible on different computers and phones and stuff. But so many, basically Windows, Microsoft, iPhones have a lot of things built into the systems now, and people who need to use these typically know how. That can be anything from magnifiers to voiceovers to the speed of the voiceover, the sensitivity of touchscreens, things like that. So that's something as a publisher or as an author you really can't control, but it's also in some ways something you don't need to worry about, because the people who are consuming these texts, they do this all the time, so they have the tools they need. Our job is to make sure our platforms and content work well with these devices. So the next question would be, is your platform accessible? So this is our Springer Publishing Connect platform that we run with Highwire. It's a website. So most people probably know things about, getting your website certified as ADD compliant in the United States. More importantly is to have it certified with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines that the WC3 makes. So hopefully if you're a publisher, your website or your platform has been audited. Usually you need to have a third party do this to audit your website. And they give recommendations of the things you need to improve on it. And that gives you, I'll show you ours. We have our web accessibility statement. But really what most probably funders or organizations are going to ask for you is to have a Vpat certification, the Voluntary Product accessibility template. It's a very long document. This is something Highwire provides us, since they are the host of the platform, and could probably share this if we want, but it really goes through. It'd be interesting for people to look at because it pretty much goes through all the different things that are checked, and then whether we support it or do not support. There's different levels of compliance, and we've never really had an institution tell us we had to meet a certain level. They just want to make sure that we're being transparent about what level of accessibility our platform has. So this is where most people sort of stop, I would say. You know, they get their platform certified, and then they're like, okay, we met our requirements, we're done. But in this case, you know, Highwire can make our platform accessible, but they can't really make our content accessible because we're producing it, we're uploading it. So if you're, you know, with us with doing textbooks, it's really our responsibility to make that content accessible. If you're a researcher writing articles, there are things you can do, and I'm going to talk about some of those. Most people, you know, the most important thing, first of all, and I think most people do this now, is, you know, things need to be in full text, HTML, full text for websites, EPUBs for readers. This is so screen readers can read them, and so users can control the font size and things like that. Most publishers have machine readable PDFs now. There's a lot of older content that isn't, it's just an image, and those aren't readable. But then you also need to start making, you really should avoid images as much as possible, you know, image files unless it's really needed. You know, your tables should be HTML, your formulas should be MathML. And unless an image is really needed for the text, it should be avoided. Though sometimes images are required, and people are probably familiar with alt text on the web. You know, in the early days of the web, this was the thing that showed up when you didn't have a graphical browser. If you weren't using Mosaic, you know, in place of the image, it would have a small text saying what that image was. This is the biggest complaint of visually impaired readers, is the lack of alt text on a lot of journals and books. And when we do provide alt text, it's often not very useful. You know, it's short, it can only be, I think, 140 characters. But often we do things like this. So we have a picture here. This is from one of our EKG books. And we'll do something like alt text. It's a drawing of a heart. That's not very useful for someone who's visually impaired. It's like, okay, great. What does that help me? You know, they should be a little more descriptive. Now this is better. It's probably not great, but this is a cross section of a heart showing the right atria, left atria, right ventricle, left ventricle, and interventricular septum. And again, this is so the screen readers can read this. But a lot of scientific texts have much more complex images. So we have one book. Ironically, this is a book about accessibility for students, and it has this long decision tree here, which is an image about the things you need to do to accommodate students. So for someone with a visual disability, this is not going to be very useful. And you can actually provide, you know, the authors did provide us with hopefully this will open up. This is actually a visual description of the flowchart going through the decision tree. Now, this isn't going to fit in a 140 character alt text. And so that's where things start to get a little more complicated, where you need to start providing that alt text somewhere else. So you can provide a link next to an image that links, maybe opens up that description in another window for the screen reader to read. You could have that description in the chapter, in the actual text of the article, the chapter, or if it's maybe a description that's being used multiple times in the alt tag, you can say, you know, go to the help menu, you know, to find this information. So some examples these are from the WC3 site. So this would be an example, you know, you have this chart, but to describe it, you need a lot more information. So you can have a link at the bottom that goes to a description that is screen readable, or you could have something somewhat like a caption where it's readable too. So this is where things start to become difficult and expensive. From a technology point of view, this isn't difficult to do, but someone needs to write these long descriptions, and someone needs to write them in a way that is useful. So for, if we have a large textbook, we can use, like if any of you use, in the publishers here, if you use Transforma or SPI or Mnet or any of your compositors, they typically will offer a service. Well, they have subject matter experts who can write descriptions for you. But it's about $20 an image. So, depending on how big your book is, it can get expensive. If you're a researcher or an author and writing an article, it'd be good to talk to your publisher about what capabilities they have, and maybe their author services provide this, or maybe you can write something. But this is where it's really not about the technology. It's about the time and the money to actually write these good descriptions. Okay. And then of course, more and more, you really should have closed captioning on your videos. This is actually less expensive than doing the alt tags, because there's lots of services out there now. We use one called Rev, where you upload your video. I think it costs like $1 a minute, and they do one pass using just AI that generates closed captioning, but then they outsource freelancers, humans, to actually watch the video and go over it and fix anything. But the reason this is not as expensive is because it's really just the technical part that's getting done. You're the person producing the video and producing the audio. Whereas with images, it takes a lot more time, because you really need subject matter experts who can write good captions. And the last part I want to talk about is something we often fail to do too, is you really need to test if you're a publisher, you really should be testing your site for accessibility. One, with tools, or having, an outside third party test it. But just like you do user testing with users, you should make sure you're also recruiting users who use assistive technologies. There isn't one exact way to do this. Since we publish a textbook on accessibility, we work with those authors, and they have users for us to test our site. If you're using an agency to do testing, you can get them to request users. If you're at a university, the Office of Disability Services might help. But it's really important to put these things in front of real users and see how it works. And I think that's where you move from just clicking a box saying, okay, yeah, we've met the funder guidelines, to really having something that a lot of people can use. So this is going a lot quicker than I thought. I'm not sure how much interest this would be to everyone, but I'm going to talk about it anyway, because it's a big part of our accessibility. So if you're in North America, and we do this for textbooks, but I'm assuming it'd be good for journals too. It's called the Access Text Network, and the way it works is publishers join it and universities join it. And if we'll get a request often from a student saying, do you have an accessible version of this book? We direct them to their university's Office of Disability Services, and they get in contact with us because they have to verify, yes, the student has this disability. We provide access text with a PDF of the text, and they do what they need to make it accessible and provide it to the university. The good part is, once we provide that text the first time, any other institution that comes to access text to request an accessible version of that text can get it. We don't have to always be providing it. So so if you are in North America and you're a publisher, this is a good thing to be a part of. It really takes, the people at Access Tests are experts, and it really takes a lot of the work and responsibility off of you. Now, you can only use this with universities and with students. It's not for, it can only be done through the universities. So I'm gonna go through this. And lastly, like, I didn't go too much into costs, but I think this is where you have to make decisions in a way, you can really do things to make your site totally accessible and your content accessible. You can have every image have good descriptions. You can have, good subtitles and things like that. But as our other presenters were saying, a lot of these things come with costs. So you really have to balance, what's the minimum you need to do to meet funding requirements. And then when you go further from that, like, what's the reality of the type of customers that'll be users that'll be using your text. We have some neurosurgery textbooks, and we tend to not spend a lot of time on that because there aren't a lot of people in that field with disabilities, but there are other texts that we spend a lot more time and money on because of that. So that's it. That went a lot quicker than I had thought. I did provide a bunch of different resources in the slides. Probably the two of the most important are links to the WC3 standard guidelines, and then the WC3 guidelines for alt text and complex images. You can get a lot more information there. So that's it. So thanks, everyone.
Well, thank you very much, Matt.
Okay.
That was great. And you helped us catch up on time too. So that was good.
Good.
Thanks for that. Okay. So there are a couple of questions, and if anybody has any questions, please go ahead and either put them in the chat or in the Q&A, whichever works best for you. I have a couple of questions to start with for Shauna. One is who is subject to the new disclosure requirements that you talked about at early in your presentation?
Sure. Thanks, Tony. So obviously all researchers applying for funding to the US federal agencies, so NIH, NSF, DOE, DOD, all those major ones. But the original document also clarified that the disclosure expectations are for both intramural researchers, so those who all work for the NIH as a researcher, and extramural, so researchers at universities or at research organizations. So it's a pretty broad sweep of all researchers in the US.
Okay, great. And do you know when the new disclosure requirements come into force?
It's not clear yet. We don't have exact dates. The NSF just published those policies and procedures that I mentioned quickly in my slides. Those will go into effect. That's expected for January of 2023. The other agencies haven't declared any dates yet, but we're expecting similar or early 2023.
Early 2023. Okay, great. Also, finally, for the peer review recognition and the reviewer's ORCID record, how do publishers write the final citation?
Sure. So your manuscript system usually has a workflow where you can ask for the researcher's ORCID ID at the start of the workflow, usually when they submit the manuscript to your organization. And then when you publish, you can also configure your system to write the citation or the peer review recognition, whichever you're working on, to that researcher's ORCID record. So we've got some pre-built integrations with some systems, and I'll put them in the chat. But ORCID, we can also do custom integrations as well into your system. So I'll stop there because you can go deep into the data real quick at this point. But if you but if you like, please, please reach out to Orchid. We can get in touch with you. And I should also quickly mention that we have our sister organization, Crossref. If you have a Crossref ID, it will also auto update that. So if there's a Crossref ID and an Orchid ID, it will auto update the researcher's Orchid record, which is really helpful. That's the ideal.
Thank you, Shauna. So I have a couple of questions for our JISC colleagues. I'm sorry, one second. So how does the UKRI open access policy compare to other funder policies and Plan S?
Yeah, we've found that there are two other major policy funders here in the UK, NIHR, who have a very similar policy, which comes into effect in a matter of weeks or a week in June this year. And Wellcome Trust had a similar policy that they put into effect at the beginning of 2021. So in most of our conversations with publishers, we focus on UKRI, but fundamentally because the policies are pretty much the same, they can be compliant with other funders too. These are all funders as organizations underneath, alongside Plan S. So we're major contributors to Plan S. We're not Plan S. They're different. We're two different bodies. Yeah, but there are other mandates coming, and many of them are much the same, especially when it comes to immediate open access. So we try to talk about them all at the same time.
Okay, and do you collaborate with funders when you're developing your support tools?
Yeah, I can jump in on that one. Yes, we do very closely, actually. We've collaborated a lot with the UKRI team in terms of the development, particularly around our tools to support the transitional agreements and transformative journals lists. So they have sort of direct input into our discussions in terms of how we develop the tools. Interesting that obviously John referred to NIHR, the National Institute of Health Research. We've also been working with them very recently in incorporating their new policy into our compliance checker, and we've been able to provide some data to them ahead of their policy launch, so they can do some activities such as checking which journals show as compliant, checking if there's some that which don't comply, and then they can address those potential issues in advance of the policy launch. So yes, we've been working really closely with them.
Okay, thank you. And then there's a question for Matt. So you talked about the long descriptions for images, but maybe it looks like there's some question as to the detail of how descriptions are associated with the image.
Yeah. So in the link to that WC3 guidelines, there's a number of different ways to do it, but they all sort of follow the same ideas. Like, so in your XML tag for an image, there's some sort of attribute that references, through an ID where that text is marked up, elsewhere. So it could be that it's a caption and it's right there with the figure, but you could also, one good part is you could have that description sort of anywhere in your article. And just like when you have references, how you can link them from the reference to the different part, to where the reference is to the footnote, you basically can do the same thing with that. And yeah, I guess the important part for this is when you're preparing like XML and EPUB, that you don't want it to be that it just works on your platform. You want something that you can be giving that XML to anyone and using it. So thanks.
Okay, great. Well, those are the questions that have come through. So I think we could probably wrap up. So there, if anybody's interested in grabbing information from the chat, please go ahead and do that now. And I do want to remind everybody that Highwire will be at SSP in Chicago. We will be at booth 518, and I encourage all of you to come by and see us. Again, thank you very much, especially to Shauna and Karen and John and Matt. Thank you for taking the time today and imparting this useful information and making our webinar series really valuable. The video will be posted. It'll be a YouTube video. We will be distributing information on that. And again, thanks everybody, and have a good rest of your week and the rest of your day.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Tony.
Thank you.
Yes.
Bye.
Thank you. Enjoy your day.